This is part 2 of Introduction to After Effects, building our first logo animation. And in this tutorial, we're going to import the logo that we created in part 1 and actually create the first logo animation. So let's go ahead and get started. Now there's a couple ways of importing a file into After Effects. Number one is to go to File, Import, File right here, or Control I. The other way is to right click in the project area, Import File. Okay, so either or works. And you can drag and drop, but I don't advise dragging and dropping because it might import it into a format you don't want. So let's go ahead and find the file. Mine's on Work Drive 2, and it's going to be TrapCG, Tutorials, Logo Animation, Logo, and I'm going to choose TrapCG Video Logo. All right, so now there's a couple ways to importing a file. As you can see here, we have Import As, Footage, Composition, Retain Layer Size, and Composition. Okay, so footage will flatten out all those layers we have, so we don't want this. Composition, Retain Layer Size will import it, and each layer will be its own size. And Composition will import it, and each layer will be the size of the comp. And I'll explain these here in a sec. Composition basically is the project. Okay, so we're going to first start with Composition, Retain Layer Size. Now, if you don't see this option, it's probably because you're running a really old version of After Effects. That's okay, because when you click Import, you'll get this option on the second window that opens. So we don't have that second window anymore in the newer version of After Effects. It's just all in one window. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Composition, Retain Layer Size. And we don't need a sequence, so I don't need to check anything else. And I'm going to click Import. All right, so again, if you're running an older version of After Effects, you'll see a second window pop up here, and then you can choose whether it's going to be a comp layer size or composition size. All right, so just keep that in mind. So you can see here what it's done is it's got two files, or a folder, and then the composition right here. That's what we call the project. All right, so if you come up here to the top of the screen, you're seeing this word composition. This is where I can create a new one without importing anything. And the composition is going to be the size of the video and the length of the video. So let's go ahead and click on this, and you can see here it's 1920 by 1080, exactly how we made it in Illustrator, and it's set my duration to 5 seconds at 30 frames per second. Yours might be different here, and I'll show you how to adjust this here in a sec. Now the other file that's here is the folder, and that contains all the layers that it imported. All right, so what it's done is it's automatically created a comp with all these layers. So let me go ahead and double click on the comp now. And double clicking opens it up down here in the timeline. And you can see here, let me open this up. If you grab on any of the edges, you can drag them. So I'm gonna drag it all the way up until I can see all my layers. If you've got tons of layers, you might not want to do that because it might fill up your entire screen. All right, so you can see here, down here is my timeline. All right. This is my time slider. If I left click and drag it, I can drag it through the timeline. Nothing's going on because we have no animation. Right here is our the actual composition viewport. So this is where we can see everything that's going on. Let's see here. And of course, you know the project window. So let's go ahead and save before I go any further. And I'm going to go File, Save. And I'm going to choose a location. So TrapCG Tutorials Logo Animation. Now, sometimes I will save this into a separate folder because After Effects will start creating folders on its own. They'll start eating up space. So let's create a new folder called Edit. This is just good habit. Or you can say After Effects Edit or VFX Edit, however you want to do it, because it's not really an actual edit file like Premiere. So let's actually call this AF. Or AE for After Effects Edit. Okay, so let's go inside this, and this is where I'm going to save it. So I'm going to call this Trap CG Logo Animation. Get rid of that extra T. It's going to save it as an AEP file, which is fine. Click Save. Before we go over the interface, let's talk about composition. So I'm going to click on the timeline and go up to Composition, Compositional Settings. All right. So in here, you can see I have the size of my composition, the frame rate, and the duration. All right. So start time code and duration, which is how long the time code is going to be. Mine's set to 5 seconds right now. I can change this value. For this first animation, 5 seconds is probably going to be a little too long, but I'm going to leave it for right now. Of course, you can set this value to anything you want. The next thing up here is size. You can adjust the size to anything you want, and of course frame rate. If you click here, it gives you some options for frame rates, or you can manually type in a value here. Now under presets, you can actually choose custom presets. So if you're working with PAL, NTSC, or all the way down to HD, DVC Pro, I mean, there's lots of options in here, even 4K. So I'm going to go ahead and leave all that for right now because I like the settings. Again, it shows the settings that I created in the Illustrator file for the size, frame rate, and duration I need to choose in After Effects. Now the background color here. As you can see here, I have no background color, and yours might actually be different, and I'm going to show that here in a sec. So don't panic if you're seeing checkered pattern and on mine and maybe on yours you're seeing a black background. I'll show you how to adjust that here in a sec. So right now the background color is black. I can change this value to any color I want. I'm going to leave it at black. Just keep in mind that this kind of fills this area here. It doesn't mean it's actually going to render black, but it is going to give it a fill color. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at right now for black. And I think that's pretty much it. And of course I can give it a name up here. You do have an advanced tab to try to adjust 3D rendering and whatnot, but we're not going to be using that in this program. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. Or OK if you adjusted any of the settings. Okay, so this checkered pattern in the background is indicating that there's an alpha channel, meaning that it's see-through. All right. So this icon right here, if I turn that off, it's going to show me black. Remember in the composition it said that the background is going to be black. So if I rendered this file with no alpha channel, it's going to be a background. Now if I rendered it with alpha channel, it's going to be a see-through background. Not a checkered pattern one, but a see-through one. All right, so the checkered pattern indicates that there's just nothing here. All right, now that that's explained, I know some of you guys are panicking over this issue. Why do I see something different? I'm actually going to turn mine to black because I think it's easier to see the logo. Okay, so let's talk about this composition window that we're seeing. This is again the playback window. If I scroll the middle mouse button, I can zoom in and zoom out of it. And right down here, I can actually physically change the size to any value, or I can click fit, which means it's going to keep to the size of this window with proportions. So it's not going to stretch or squash it. So if I grab this and move it down, it increases. If I grab it up, it decreases. Okay, so let me go about there. All right, so that's the view percentage that we're seeing it at, just so you can zoom in and zoom out. Right next to it is you got some playback options, but we're not going to be, or sorry, preview options. We're not going to be working with these right now. So I'm going to skip those. Right here you have title safe. This is always good to know. If you click and hold this down, again, left click and hold it down, or I think this, in this case, you can just click on it. Yeah, you can click on it. So this is the title safe. This shows you what you want to keep inside for various different TV sizes. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. You also have grid and rulers to turn on if you want to. And turn that off for now. Okay. Next thing over deals with mask, making mask visible or not visible within the viewport. We don't have any masks, so that's not going to make a difference right now. Right here indicates where in the timeline I'm at. So if I scrub this, you can see this value changes. Scrub it back, and it changes again. Next shot is snapshot. So this is useful for being able to take a quick snapshot of whatever's in this frame. It doesn't save it, it doesn't export it. All it does is it takes a snapshot. And then I can use this icon right here to see that snapshot later on in the timeline. Right now, the whole timeline is the same thing, so we're not going to see a difference, so I'm not going to be clicking on it. But you'll hear like a camera click if your speakers are on when you click this. Okay, next thing over is the display management or color channel management. So if I click on this, right now we're viewing it in RGB mode. You can view it just in red or green or blue or alpha or RGB straight without an alpha. So there's a couple of options. I don't really tend to play with that. Next thing is resolution. Okay, so this is strictly for playback in this window. If I have a large file and my computer's starting to slow down or take forever to play back this animation, I would actually change this resolution to a lower amount. So you can go all the way down to quarter, or you can choose a custom option. You have half. Now just to show you, I'm going to click quarter, and you can see here the quality of the image is degraded. All right. And don't worry, that doesn't mean your export's going to be degraded, and it doesn't mean it's messed with my file. It just means that it's made it easier for the program to play back the animation. So I'm going to go back to full right now. So anyway, you'll probably see me adjust this if I think the computer's taken too long to buffer the animation, or that it's just really slowing down when I'm trying to move things. Then you have some adjust regional interest areas. Region of interest areas this deals with. You can actually just RAM preview specific areas of the animation. We're not going to deal with that. And I think that's a newer thing. I don't think you'll find that in older versions of After Effects. Then you have the active camera view. Click on this. You can choose different views. We're not working with 3D mode right now, so none of these views are going to make a difference. So active camera view right now is fine. And then you can have multiple different windows in here by splitting it up. So right now I have one view. I can do two views. So this one is going to have the alpha channel on, and this one's going to have it off. So each one has its own settings, and you can choose which view you're going to have in this viewport. So I'm going to switch this back to 1 because again, we really don't need that for this particular animation. Then you have adjusting some settings for if you're using anamorphic settings for the actual video playback. Then this option right here is for fast previews. This is a newer thing for After Effects. You probably won't see this in older After Effects, so I'm not going to really deal with it. Then you have a timeline option. You have a composition flow chart. You have a reset exposure for the program, and then of course to adjust the exposure right here. So we're not really going to work with those last icons, and you'll probably really forget about them. I'm sorry for going over them, but I just wanted to let you know that what these are, just in case in the back of your mind you do remember. Okay, so now let's go down to the timeline. Actually, let's jump up to this tab up here. So this is the kind of control bar for tools, all right? So right now I'm on this black arrow tool. That's the selection tool. If I roll over, it gives me the shortcut key, which is V. So this allows me to select things in the viewport, as well as the timeline, okay? So it doesn't matter which way I'm going to select them, but this is the selection tool. The next tool over is the hand tool, okay? The hand tool allows me to pan around an environment, all right? So if I zoom in, I can pan. Sorry about that. And if I zoom out, and again, I'm using the middle mouse button, scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Okay, so shortcut key is H on the keyboard for this, but there's also two temporary shortcut keys for the hand tool. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool so I can select things. Now, shortcut key number 1 is spacebar on the keyboard. That allows me to pan the viewport. And again, just holding down spacebar. You don't click it, you have to hold it down. All right, this also works in the timeline. So down here is the zoom in and zoom out option. So I'm going to zoom in. And now if I hold down spacebar, I can pan left and right in the timeline. Or I can grab this bar down here to pan left and right. All right, so let me zoom back out. The other shortcut key is the middle mouse button. If you click and hold the middle mouse button, you can pan the viewport. And I don't think the middle mouse button works, so it does in the timeline as well. So again, I'm clicking and holding the middle mouse button. All right, so let me zoom back out. Okay, so that's the pan tool. Again, I rarely ever come up and click on it because I have the middle mouse button or spacebar options to activate it. The zoom icon, I never use this, but it allows you to zoom in, and if you hold down Alt, zoom out. Again, middle mouse button works just as well. I'll flip this back to fit. Let's see here, next tool is rotate. So if I click and rotate on an object, you can see here I can rotate it. So I'm going to undo that. Control Z is the undo option. If you come up to edit, you have the undo redo right here. Okay, and you also have a history option as well. All right, next option over is the camera tool. This allows you to play with the camera. If you click and hold it down, you can see other options. Shortcut key is C on the keyboard. All right, so we're not working with cameras right now, so I'm not going to go into it. Next one is the pan tool. This one deals with the actual layers, panning the layers left and right in control. We're not going to work with this tool right now either. Next tool is the rectangular tool, which actually is a shape tool. Now, if I click and hold this down, I get various different shapes. These are vector shapes, so it allows you to draw any of these shapes in the viewport as either mask or actual vectors. I'm going to click off of it for right now. Next tool is the actual pen tool. This allows you to draw shapes or draw masks. If you click and hold it down, you got more options as well. So let me come out of that. Next tool is the type tool. Now, if I click on this, it's going to open up some extra windows. So let me go ahead and do that. You can see it open up character and paragraph. This allows me to type out text. So let me click in the viewport and I can start typing. So I can have physical type directly in After Effects. I'm going to go ahead and delete this layer by hitting delete on the keyboard. I'm going to right click on these and close these. Don't need them. Okay, so that's the text tool. If you click and hold it down, you got other options. Whoops, did not want to reactivate those. And then you have the paintbrush tool, stamp tool, which we're not working with these right now. I'm just going to quickly go through them. So paintbrush, you can paint. Stamp, clone stamp tool allows you to clone stamp like Photoshop. Eraser tool allows you to erase these settings. And you have a roto brush tool. This deals with basically mass. And then the puppet pin tool, which deals with animation. And probably not going to go through any of those in this tutorial, but just showing you those what those tools are. Okay. So now that we've gone through this window and we've gone through these windows, let's jump down to here. Let's see here. Okay, so down in the timeline, you may or may not be seeing everything that I'm seeing right here. Okay, and that's because down here you don't have these options selected. So if I click on this, you can see it decreases what I can see. So the only things that are primarily seen is the layer names and parenting. All right, so parenting is where I can link this layer to R, and linking means that if it's linked to R and I move R around, it's going to follow. So I'm going to demonstrate this. Don't do this, but just as a demonstration, I can either click on none and choose R. So now when I click on, let me go to my move tool, T is going to follow R. All right, so that's one way of linking two objects. I'm going to go none, or I can grab this little icon right here, which is what they call a pick whip, and I'm going to click on R. Now when I move R around again, T follows. Okay, so let me select back to none, and just to show you, now T is not following. So I'm going to undo that. Okay, so that's the standard settings. Now if I click this little icon right here, I get some more settings. These settings deal with 3D and visibility. So number one over here, this actually makes the layer visible or not visible in the actual composition. So if I don't want to see, let's say, the trap, I can just click and drag over these eyes, and they disappear. Oh, I went too far. And of course, I can just click on each individual one to make it visible or not visible. All right, so that deals with visibility in the composition window here. Now, if I don't want to see the layer, let's say I'm done with animating Trap CG and it's just in my way. All right, so what I could do is click on these little guys here. Now you're not seeing anything happen. That's because this tool is not activated. So right here, it says hide all layers for which the shy switch has been set. So these are the shy switches. So if I click on it, those layers go away. Now they're not deleted, they're just hiding. So this is how you can clean up your timeline. So when you're working on specific sections, I've worked on timelines that have had over 500-600 layers plus, and I've needed to use this so I can navigate through it more efficiently. So let me go ahead and turn this off and uncheck these because we really don't need that right now. If you click and drag, you can deactivate them. The next option over deals with comp. Let me roll over it. This is for collapse transforms for vector layers. It's like a rasterize effect. Then you have the quality of sampling. You can see here it's set to straight. I can click a curved option and then a jagged option. Again, this is for kind of the vector edges. I'm not sure. Let me zoom in here. If I click on these, if you're really going to see a difference, yeah, you can kind of see a difference when I'm clicking through these. All right, let's actually choose something that has a curve and click through this. You can see that it's a little bit more jaggy on the edges, or not in that case. There we go. See, its quality is a little bit less. So let me turn that back on. I rarely play with this, just showing you that it is here. Next option over is motion blur. So I can click on this and create motion blur for the layers. Of course, nothing's moving, so nothing's going to happen. Now the motion blur turn on tool, it has to be here. So if this is not enabled, this won't do anything. So if this has to be on, then you can activate these. Okay. So this is kind of the overall composition turning on motion blur. And these are turning on motion blur for each individual layer because this actually won't affect any of the layers. You have to activate it on the layers you want motion blur, which is a very neat feature because sometimes you don't want motion blur on certain things. And the next thing over deals with mask. We're not going to go into that right now. And not mask, adjustment layers. This will allow the effect to be applied or not applied to the layer that the adjustment is above. Okay. Then you have the 3D layer. This will actually convert the object into a quasi 3D object, giving you a Z space access. We're not going to deal with that right now. And you also have up here draft 3D for when you're working with the 3D options. And that's pretty much all the new elements that were added when we clicked on this button. So let's go ahead and click on the next button. The next button you can see opens up even more stuff. Now it opens up the track view or track matte. This deals with creating masks from layers. And you have the blending modes, just like Photoshop. You can click on here and choose the blending mode. I'm not going to work with that right now, just showing you that's what it is. All right, so moving forward, the last option is, click here, gives you the time code display. All right, so you have your in, out, duration, and stretch. You can actually just grab this and decrease the length of the individual layer. So let me set this back to 100. Clicking on it allows me to manually type in a number. Okay, so is there anything else? Nope, so let me go ahead and start hiding some of these. Let's see, I don't need this. I don't need this right now. Actually, I don't need any of this right now. So let's just stick with the basic. Let's take the time slider back to frame 0. Let's change the viewport to fit. All right, so before I begin any type of animation, what I like to do is duplicate this comp. So I have an original comp that I can always go back to if I mess up the animation. So to duplicate, you select it, and you can come up to Edit, Control D right here, duplicate. So the shortcut key is Control D, or you can click this. So you can see here it's created a second composition. So I'm going to actually rename my first one. This is my first one. I'm going to right click, say rename. You do have to right click, or hit, I think, enter on the keyboard will allow you to rename it as well. So Trap CG video logo. I'm going to call this Trap CG new. Actually, no, I'm going to call it layer size. Layer size. Okay. And what I'm going to do is add an underscore to the beginning of it. And the reason why I'm doing the underscore to the beginning is to make sure it stays at the top of the list. So this is going to be my original file. Now this is going to be my first animation. So let me double click this. And you can see here it opened up a new timeline because it's a new composition. So I can click on the old one and I can hit this X button right here because I don't need it in my timeline. Okay, so here's my new composition. And let's go ahead and rename this. Rename Trap CG video. Let's go Trap CG logo. And animation 1. So this can be my first logo animation. And just to make sure, I double click on it and we're all set to go. So let me go ahead and go File, Save. Go ahead and click on the top layer. Go ahead and click on the arrow and click on the next arrow. And now you can see some values. Now if you're not seeing these values right here, all you need to do is click this little icon right here and it will make them pop up. But they should already be there because we created a new comp and that automatically activates the first selection in these 3 icons. Okay, so we have anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. Let me zoom in here. Anchor point is this little dot right here. So if I click and drag on these values, I can change them. And to show you what anchor point really does, I'm going to Control Z. So that's undo, edit, undo, redoer right here. So if I click on rotation right now, you can see that the object rotates around its center, where the anchor point is at. Now if I change the anchor point, you can see when I rotate the object now is rotating almost in a circle-like motion. All right, I'm going to undo that and undo that. So the anchor point is kind of the center for the object. It doesn't have to stay in the center, but it is the center. Position is the entire position of the object. Now the way these things are set up is X and Y, and they're separated by the little commas. All right, so anytime you're seeing these values, Y is up and down, X is left and right. And that's for any one of these. You have scale. If I scale it up, scale it down. Now if I don't want to scale it up uniformly, meaning that these two values change at the same time, I uncheck this. And now you can see I can scale on one axis. All right, so that's pretty cool. I have rotation, what we've talked about. Now there's this little extra value right here, and that's what we call a full rotation. So if I come to here and type in 360 degrees, you can see here it added a 1. That's indicating that I rotated 1 time around. So now if I type in 720, which is 2 times, it gives us 3 because I already had a 1 there. So it's just adding them together. All right, so if I set this to 0 just to prove it, type in 720, so you can see it's 2. All right, so that's a quick way of adding full rotations instead of having to try to click and drag this to get them. And opacity. Opacity is the visibility of the object. So if I scale it down, it disappears. Scale it up, it comes back. All right. So it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to go ahead and close this for now. I'm going to zoom out. So I'm thinking I'm going to create my first animation where all these letters move from right to left. Now, if you've got a different logo design, you might want to go from top to bottom or bottom to top, left to right, whatever you want to do. Scale it up, scale it down. You've got lots of options. So let's go ahead, and since I'm going to do position and I want to do it to all these layers, I want to select all these layers. I don't want to do this one at a time. That would take too much time. So with the T selected, I'm going to hold down Shift and click on the G. So it selects all the layers. I'm going to hit P on the keyboard. That activates the position. That's a shortcut key. All right. Now it doesn't really activate it, just makes it visible. Shortcut key for anchor point is A. Shortcut key for rotation is R. Scale is S. And T is opacity. So opacity is the only one that doesn't have the first letter as the shortcut key. That's because O is being used for something else. So again, we're going to click on P to show us the position. And these little stopwatches right here, turn on animation mode and set a keyframe. And keyframes are basically little points that store data. I'll show you right here in a sec. So let's go ahead and click this. And it creates these little blue keyframes, which are diamond shaped. If you're running an older version of After Effects, this is probably going to be yellow or gray. So don't panic, the color doesn't matter as long as they're diamond shaped. Now if I click on it again, it turns off animation mode and deletes all the keyframes. All right, so just keep that in mind. When you want to turn on animation mode, you probably don't want to turn it off again unless you're trying to remove the animation. So what I'm going to do is do a backwards animation, meaning that I'm going to start later in the timeline because this is my final position for the animation. I'm trying to have it animate in. So I'm going to go ahead and take my time slider. I'm going to click and drag it. I'm left clicking, by the way, all the way to frame 15. All right. Now you can choose any frame in the timeline that you want. You can take a full 5 seconds if you want to create your animation. It's up to you. But I think frame 15 is going to be good. All right. So with the time slider at frame 15, I'm going to turn on the stopwatch and it sets my first keyframes. So now if I grab the time slider and slide it all the way back to frame 0, I can actually change the position of the object. Now I can do it multiple ways. I can actually grab the object in the viewport, hold down Shift, so I'm only moving it on the X-axis. And as you can see, it automatically created keyframes for me. And if I scroll or grab and scrub the timeline, you can see here's the animation. Voila. So what it is that it's creating a data point here and a data point here, and it's automatically animating in between. So if I take the time slider to say the center and I move these guys up, it's creating a new keyframe and it's automatically animating in between. So I don't want that. I can actually, with these keyframes selected, if they're not selected, I can click in blank space, drag over them and hit delete on the keyboard. That's one way of getting rid of them. Or you can come over here and click this icon right here and that gets rid of them as well. This icon also sets keyframes. So I can set keyframes without actually changing any value. All right. And that's usually if you want to hold a specific position somewhere and you don't want to try to have to change a number to get it. So I'm going to turn that off. So I already have our first animation of movement. The object is moving in. So let's play this back real time. This work area bar right here, this is what it's called. I'm going to grab it by the edge and drag it over. I'm doing this because I only want to play back this area right now. I don't want to have to play back the full 5 seconds. All right. This also will control what renders out of the program. So we've got this set. There's a couple of shortcut keys for the newer version of After Effects, but the older one, if you want to play it back in real time, is 0 on the numeric keypad. Okay. And same thing in this version, 0 does the same thing. Is it plays it back in real time. And what it's doing is it's buffering the animation into the RAM. Now I believe the newer After Effects actually uses the graphics card and buffers it into the graphics card, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I'm going to stick with calling it RAM preview for now, because that's definitely the way the older After Effects has worked, is a RAM preview. Now, newer version of After Effects, you can also hit spacebar and it will give you the same result. Older versions of After Effects, spacebar does not buffer the animation into the RAM, okay? So it's not going to play back real time. Okay, what else? You can also come up to composition, preview, and in the older version of After Effects it will actually be an option called RAM preview, and this one it just says play current preview. And you can also open up a window, preview, and right here you have playback options. So I'm going to click rewind and I can hit play. Now older versions of After Effects, again, this is not a RAM preview. You have to activate it through one of the sub options, but in this one it does RAM preview. And you can see here, here's the shortcut keys. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. All right, so those are the shortcut keys of playing back your animation. So I don't like the way that the animation just kind of stops. It's like a hard truck hitting a wall, bam. Okay, so I want to slow it down when it gets near to the end. So it just starts to slow down here. Now instead of adding keyframes and trying to manually do it, we can actually change these keyframes to have ease-ins, nice little arcs. Now I'm going to visually show you this first. So I'm going to go ahead and click this graph right here. First I'm going to select these keyframes. Again, I'm clicking in blank space, and then left clicking, by the way, and dragging over the keyframes. And I'm going to click this graph right here. It's called Graph Editor. And you can see here that the animation is a straight line. All right, so it's changing in value. So this is how much it's changing in value over time. This is time. This is the value that's changing. All right, so left to right. Or sorry, right to left in this case. So it's a straight line, meaning that the animation stays at the same speed all the way through. So I'm going to turn this off. So I'm going to right click on these, go all the way down to Keyframe Assistant, and click Ease In. Now I'm using Ease In because we want to ease into the keyframe. The other options, let me do that again. Oops. Select these, right click, Key Assistant. You have Ease Out, which means you're going to ease out to the keyframe. So I would use this at the beginning of the animation, or the first keyframe, not the last one. And then we have Easy Ease, which creates an hourglass look and allows it to ease in and out of the particular keyframe. So right now, Ease In works perfect. Okay, so now if I take a look at the graph, you can see here it's got this really steep, and then it starts to slow down, this arc. That means that it's changing less over time. So let's go ahead and play this back. And you can see it slows down at the end. Now, the time it takes to get from point A to point B is still the same. All right, that hasn't changed. It's just the fact that we're kind of pushing around the frames in between here to create this ease in. Now, some of you might not actually be able to see this. So I'm going to undo all this, Control Z, and I'm going to give it a demo by duplicating this first layer. So I'm going to hit Control D, that duplicates, all right? Or I can come up to Edit and duplicate, whoops, right here, Control D. So now I have a new layer. I'm going to hit U on the keyboard. So right now, all of them at the same time come into position, but I'm going to grab just the second one right here. In fact, actually, let me just do it to the first one. So I'm going to right click, Key Assistant, Ease In. And now I'm going to play this back. And you can barely see it because it's so quick, but let me scrub it. Here is the first T. This is the one we have selected. So it's actually speeding up at the beginning. So it's beating the animation here, so it can slow down here, while the other elements are staying at the constant speed. All right, so that's how you can visually tell the difference between the two. I'm going to go ahead and delete this layer, select it, delete. So I'm going to select all these keyframes, right click, Keyframe Assistant, Ease In. So I get a nice little ease in at the end. Okay, so this is kind of boring. Maybe add a little bit extra animation to this. Let's add some rotation. So again, final position, I'm thinking that it needs to be set. So let's hit R on the keyboard. I'm going to click this stopwatch right here. So that's set my keyframes. And let's go back to frame 0. And let's rotate it. Let's say about that much. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit 0 on the keyboard again. And now we have these things kind of rotating in position. It's still not good enough, so I'm thinking maybe after it hits here, it's going to over-rotate a little bit. So I'll go a couple frames over, rotate it in the opposite direction. Now it's looking good. And then scroll back a couple frames and set it to 0 again. So now it kind of overcompensates. It's probably a little bit too much. So now I'm going to hit 0 on the keyboard. That looks a little bit better. So now you're seeing how we can create keyframes and add a little bit of extra animation to our full animation. Okay. I don't like the fact that the rotation is happening on the center where the anchor point's at. So I want to change that. I'm going to A on the keyboard. Now I'm not going to set keyframes for this because I don't want to animate it, but I want to change where the anchor point is at. To do so, I'm actually going to click and drag on the Y value so I can place the anchor point right here at the base for each one of these letters. And now if I scrub this timeline, you can see that the rotation happens from the base, which is definitely a lot better. However, now I've changed the position of my text, and that's not good. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to position P on the keyboard. Now, if I just select all the layers right now and move them down while I'm on the last keyframe, you can see here it's created now a top to bottom animation look, and I definitely don't want that. So I'm going to undo this, Control Z. What I need to do is select all the keyframes. So I'm drag selecting over all the keyframes. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to click and drag this down until I get it to where it was. Oops. That's probably close because I remember it was right off this line right here. There we go. So now both keyframes have been shifted down because both of them were selected and I had the time slider over one of the keyframes. Okay, so those are the important things. Time slider over a set of keyframes and you select all the keyframes. So now if I play this, they're in the correct position. And of course I can play with, let's go back to rotation, maybe adding some easy ease elements to this. So let's say easy ease to this one. Easy ease, and then an ease in to these. And I don't really want to change an ease out to these because I like the kind of the hard snap that's happening. There we go. And if I want to even just kind of over exaggerate the return, that's a little bit better. Of course, I can actually have it rotate back and forth a couple of times like it's really wobbly. So it goes left, right, and then maybe it settles back down. That's up to you. It's all about what you want to create. I'm just showing you how to set your keyframes and animate stuff. Okay, so this is still kind of a little boring. Maybe I should have the letters come in separately instead of all at once. Now there's a couple ways to do this. Number one is by hand. So I'm going to go ahead and click on a layer that I don't have selected. I'm going to start with R, and I'm going to offset it, let's say 2 frames. And then start with A, offset, and I'm just clicking and dragging each one of these layers over. Now, if the layer is not in a certain area of the timeline, it's not going to be visible, but because it's off the screen, I don't have to worry about it. And now we have the layers coming in individually. Let me stretch the timeline out a little bit. That's much better. Okay. So now that we have the animation of them sliding in and rotating its offset, that's definitely one way you can do it. Now, if you've got a ton of layers, that would be a nightmare to have to go through and do that by hand. So I'm going to undo this. And by the way, just to demonstrate what happens, let me take these guys all the way over here. Let me just grab the back end of this and move it this way. And you can see that the art disappears. So if this little timeline piece is not there, the object is not visible. So I'm going to bring that back. So you can grab both the endpoints on either side and move them to increase or decrease the length of each bar. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to select all these bars to automatic offset. And I'm showing you this because you might have a scenario where you have a ton of layers that you need to offset. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift and click on G so I have them all selected. Now this automatic offset is going to be based off of how many frames each layer is. So let's say I want a 2-frame offset. So I'm going to go 1, 2. I'm going to grab this end over here and hold down Shift to snap it to my time slider, just like that. Now, there is a shortcut key for this. I'm going to Control Z. If you hold down Alt and the bracket, now next to P on the right side, you have 2 brackets, right? And then you have a backslash. You want to use the bracket that's next to the backslash because that's the end bracket. So I'm going to hold down Alt and click the end bracket. Now, if I held down Alt and clicked on the first bracket, the one right next to P, it's going to do the front end. Okay, so I'm going to undo that, Alt, and bracket. Okay, so that's a shortcut key of cutting down the timeline. So now that I have these set, I think I actually have one too many frames in here. I think these are now 3-frame offsets. Yeah, 1, 2. No, maybe 2. No, that's 1. That's 2. So I do have 3 frames. There we go. That's better. So 1, 2. Okay, so from here, what I'm going to do is right click and I'm going to go up to Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. And it's going to ask me if I want some overlap. I don't, so I'm just going to click OK. And now you can see it automatically offset each of the layers for me. Now I need to go all the way back to the end here. Let me zoom out and hold down Alt and end bracket again, which again is the one next to the backslash on the keyboard. And you can see here it stretched the timeline out. So now if I play this, we have the same result. So again, that method is used best when you have lots of layers that you need to offset. It doesn't work that great when you just have a few because you can see it took more steps to do so. But there we have it. Just showing you both options because I know actually that's a common complaint that people ask about. How do I automatically offset many layers? All right, so we have our first set of animation. Let's go ahead and save this file. Now that I'm happy with the text, I'm going to move on to the actual icon. So let's go ahead and select the T for the center, sorry, not the T on the top here. And let's go ahead and hold down Shift and select all these parts. So I'm thinking maybe having all these parts scale up from 0. So maybe they don't exist and then they're scaling into the frame. Now because the anchor point is at the center of each object, that's going to give us a good look. So let me go ahead and take the time slider. I think it should take about maybe 10 or 15 frames. So maybe let's go with 15. All right, so at 15 frames, I'm going to hit S on the keyboard and click the stopwatch to set my first keyframe on scale, by the way. I'm going to take the time slider all the way back and click 0 or type in 0 in the scale. So now you can see here, everything scales to nothing. So if I grab the time slider, it scales up. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty easy. I think I'm going to offset these as well. You know what? I don't think I'm going to actually offset these. Maybe offset the ones in the center so they come in a little bit later. So I'm going to hit S again. And my center options are, let's see here. Let me take the time slider all the way back. Click off of these. Yeah, I think these pieces are the center. So I'm going to go ahead and 1, 2, Alt click, 1, 2, Alt and, or sorry, Control and click on the layer, deselects it. 1, 2, Control click, 1, 2, Control click, 1, 2. Actually, you know what? I don't like the offset of each individual one. Just want to have it offset to where it starts a little bit later. Yeah. Maybe one more frame. Let's do one more. Let's play that back. Okay. So the one thing I don't like is how it kind of snaps in the scale. So let me select all these layers, hit S on the keyboard, and I'm going to drag select this time this way to grab all these layers. Now, here's a good time to talk about a really nifty shortcut key in After Effects. So you can see here now I'm having to really start to scroll the timeline down here, there's a shortcut key that will maximize whatever window that your mouse is over. So it's called the tilde key. It's right next to, it's to the left of 1 and right above tab on the keyboard. Okay, so it's a little squiggly mark icon. I click that and it will maximize the window that I'm selecting. So if I want to maximize this window, I can. So let's say I set this to fit. You can see here it will stay with the window size. And I can even maximize this window if I wanted to. And again, to get out of it, I just click the tilde key again, and it comes out of that mode. So that's tilde, that's to the left of 1 and right above tab. Okay, so now that I know that I have all these keyframes selected, right click, key assistant, ease in. And that should work. Tilde, and let's take a look. Yeah, that's much better. So now it's not snapping into place. Now, some people like to exaggerate the ease in, which is definitely pretty cool. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click on the graph editor. And you can see here, I'm seeing the graph. Let me go ahead and click on these buttons to kind of frame it better. Let me maximize this graph actually. So we're having the ease in. This little handle right here, if I click and drag it out, I'm going to hold down Shift so I don't accidentally drag it on the X axis, just the Y. Or sorry, I'm trying to drag it on the X-axis and not the Y. So left to right. So you can see here now I've created this very sharp, or sorry, not sharp, but very like over-exaggerated ease in. So let's go ahead and come out of this mode and take a look at what that did. I'm going to go tilde again, hit 0, and you can see it takes a little bit longer to move into position, which is definitely better. And the longer your animation is, the more apparent the ease in will be. Because these animations are fairly quick, that's why it's a little harder to see the ease in, but it's there and it looks nice. Okay, so there's one more thing I want to do to these, and that is I don't like the way that these side pieces are interacting with the centerpiece. So I'm thinking it might be cool. Let's go ahead and click off of all these. In fact, actually, let me minimize them. I'm going to hit S on the keyboard to close them out. So let's say I scrub the timeline and I want them to rotate into position as well as they're scaling up. So this is going to be these two pieces. I'm going to hit R on the keyboard. And they probably should be in final rotation, probably actually at frame 15. So I'm going to, at frame 15, click the rotate button. So that's the final rotation. Let me scrub back and let's say I want the rotation, let's try starting at the beginning. Now I really can't see it, so let me come to here, and I think I'm gonna have to rotate these individually. Yep. So let me click off and just rotate this one up. So let's go 50 degrees maybe, and this one is going to be -50. Okay, so we have positive and -50, and now if I scrub the timeline, you can see they lock into position. Now I can grab both these keyframes and slide them back. And they kind of snap into position, so let me go ahead and grab these two keyframes, key assistant, ease in. Let's take a look at that. Much better. Okay. So there is our final actual animation. Looking pretty good. Give yourself a round of applause, creating your first After Effects animation. So let's go ahead and get this to where we can render it out. Now, rendering out all depends on what you want to do with this, okay? So like I said a long time ago, actually before I do this, let me talk about one more shortcut key, and that is U on the keyboard. So let me select these first layers. If I hit P, I'm seeing just position. If I hit R, I'm just seeing R. But if I hit U, I'm going to see whatever has keyframes on it. So it's going to show me position and rotation. So if I need to see both at the same time, this has the ability to do so without having to open up all the other elements, okay? Because of course some people like to do this. They'll sit there and open this up, and then you've got everything, and it just eats up too much space. So again, if I hit U on the keyboard, it will show me all the active keyframes. And if I hit it again, it will close it out, okay? So that's U. Now, like I was saying earlier, This all depends on what you're going to do with it for the render output. So if you're going to render it out to be used in, let's say, Premiere as a bug for one of your shows or one of your animations or your demo reel, then you might want to just render it out as PNG images or Targa, TIFF images, whatever format you like the most. I like PNG because it stores an automatic alpha channel. And that way, like I said, this has an alpha channel. It's a background that's invisible. If I render it out as PNG images, I can put this in Premiere on top of whatever I want. However, if this is just going to be an animation I'm going to quickly throw online, then of course I just render it out as a normal like QuickTime movie or something like that. So let's go ahead and go through the render output settings. Number one, you want to set this time slider or the work bar area to how long you want the animation to be. I actually tend to like to set my animation, my timeline to be the length of what I want to render. So I'm going to just go ahead and grab the work area bar, move it all the way to the end. And in this case, basically we have a second of actual animation, looks like a little over a second. So maybe 3 seconds is a good time frame to hold the animation. So if I was going to add this to a demo reel as an individual animation or throw it up on, let's say, YouTube, 3 or 4 seconds is probably good. I don't need 5. So let's set it to 4. So I'm going to come up to composition, compositional settings, and I'll just type in 4 right here. Click OK. So now that's set. 4 seconds. And that's just giving me leadway so that people can actually see the final position of the logo. All right, so to render out, you're going to go Composition, Add to Render Queue. Now you do have the media encoder. However, the media encoder does not store, I don't think it has an option to be able to render out the alpha channel. So if you want alpha channel, you definitely have to go through the Add Render Queue. The media encoder is kind of like a final encoder. If you're going to send it somewhere. So, and of course, this is an external rendering system. So if I use this, I can continue to work in After Effects without really slowing down my workflow. However, if your computer's not fast enough, because mine really can't handle working in After Effects and encoding, your system may slow down a lot and even crash. So right now I'm just going to go Add to Render Queue, which is Control M. So it opens up this window. And here's the options. Some people like to move this window somewhere else. I like to just drag it over so it's at the beginning of my tabs here in the timeline. Okay, so render queue's checked. The first option is the settings for the size and the quality. So right now it's set to resolution full, quality best, that's all good. Use frame rate at 30 frames per second, that's good. So everything else in here is good. So I'm just going to click OK. I'm going to click the word lossless. And what this does gives me the ability to choose which format I'm saving this as. So right now it's set to AVI. I think on Macs you'll have QuickTime instead of AVI. So I'm going to click here, and this is where I can choose. Like I said, if I was going to do an image sequence that I'm re-importing somewhere else, PNG sequence right here, or TIFF sequence, Targa sequence, whatever format you like the best. I really like PNGs because they're smaller than TIFFs and Targas, and they give me a pretty good quality image. You also have OpenEXR sequences, so you got lots of options in here. This format here I've actually used in studios for playbacks. Let's see, I think Airspeed uses this format. That's a playback device for networks. Anyway, moving forward, I digress. Let's go to QuickTime. That's a pretty common format. So the QuickTime is kind of the container, and I can go to Format Options here, and I can choose what kind of codecs I'm running. So right now it's a PNG codecs. It's not going to give me individual images. Don't think of it like that. Think of it as kind of the compression. So PNG gives me the ability to store alpha channel. So does animation up here. So those are the two options I know for a fact that stores alpha channel. Targa and TIFF will store alpha channel. The rest of them, I'm not quite sure. I know H.264 does not. So if I'm going to just render this out to YouTube, I'd probably choose H.264 or MPEG-4. Now, let's actually jump over to the web real quick. Come on, computer, you can do it. Running. Or not. A little worried about what just happened. Here, let me hit cancel here. It's probably because I had that window open. There we go. Okay, so if I type in YouTube, or if you're using what is it, Viom or Voem or something like that. Probably pronouncing that entirely wrong. But YouTube video encoding specs. Recommended upload encoding settings. That's what we want. Okay, so this is theirs. They want you to try to use the container MP4. I don't think that was in the list, actually. I know through the media encoder that has an MP4 option. I don't know how well it works, but yeah, it doesn't look like we have an MP4 in this list. So QuickTime will work just as well. And then audio codecs, AAC. We're not using audio right now, but again, this is all about knowing the formats that they prefer. Video codecs, H.264, and it gives you options for the video codecs here. You can even choose options for frame rate and then the bit rate. So if you have the ability to change bit rate, these are the recommended bit rates for the various different frame rates, and even the audio bit rate. Okay. So again, I'm just showing you because there is information out there to be specific about what kind of codecs to use depending on what you're going to be doing. So QuickTime, let's see, QuickTime. Usually, like I said, when I'm coming out of After Effects, I do a PNG or a hefty, like a really top-end format. So right now I'm going to leave it as PNG. Click OK. And I'm going to do RGB plus alpha. So I'm going to click here. What that does is saves the RGB levels and the alpha channel. And you can see here it automatically switched the depth to millions of colors plus, meaning that it's going to store the alpha channel. Size I'm going to leave. Crop I'm not going to do. And audio is set to auto right now, so it's going to detect whether there's audio in the timeline or not. You can also choose audio on or audio off. I'm going to leave mine at audio auto for right now. So that's everything's good. Of course, I can choose format options and choose the AAC option that the YouTube suggested. I'm going to hit cancel. I think everything else is good. Click OK. Then you need to choose the location right here. Click on this. And let's go, we're in animation. Let's go to tutorials. Logo animation, and I like to create a folder for my final renders. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, new folder. I'm going to do underscore final renders, and I use the underscore to make sure it jumps to the top of the list because this is where I'll save all my renders to. And TrapCG logo animation 1 is good. I'm going to open it up. Let's go inside of it. So final renders and click save. So now everything's saved and set up correctly. These little arrows here have various different options you can choose. But I'm going to leave it as is. We're good. So all I need to do now is click render. Now in older versions of After Effects, you're going to see a playback in this window of the animation. If you want to kind of speed up the animation a little bit, just hit caps lock on the keyboard and that will freeze the animation like it is here. The newer version of After Effects doesn't give you playback in the viewport. It just automatically starts rendering and you have no idea what's going on. So you hope that it's rendering correctly and that you actually chose the right timeline to render out. So just waiting, and it's a good idea to name your timelines correctly because that way you know for a fact you're rendering out the right timeline. Because you might have a bunch of timelines down here. It's almost done. Boom. Okay, so let's go ahead and minimize this for now. Let me open up the folder and choose TrapCG, recorded tutorials, logo animation, final renders. Okay, there we go. And let's double click this to play. Again, this was a PNG. A QuickTime movie, but with the PNG encoder, so that way it does have an alpha channel. Now we're not going to see the alpha channel in the QuickTime. There it goes, and it's a full 1920 by 1080 video. So hit play, and there you have it. Now it's not going to play back smoothly on my machine because of the size and format that it's in. But I can close this. To show you that there's an alpha channel on it, I'm going to go ahead and go back to After Effects. I'm going to import it. So import file, actually instead of doing it that way, I'm just going to drag and drop it. So it's importing. So let's go to this timeline here and drag and drop it on top of it. And I'm actually going to hit P to offset it. And as you can see here, I can see through it. So this is the actual animation. You can position it here, or maybe even, let's go over a little bit this way. Let's decrease the scale a little bit, S on the keyboard, P on the keyboard. And now if I play my animation, 0 on the keyboard, you can see here I have both of them. So, like I said, it's stored in Alpha Channel. My suggestion though is that, like I said, if you're just sending your animation directly to YouTube, use H.264. That's not going to store an Alpha Channel. It will leave a black background, or whatever background you guys set. So, last notes for this particular tutorial, and then we're going to have a part 3 to create a whole new animation. Number 1 is, if you want a different background and not a transparent one, like a colored one, you can actually create a solid object. So in your timeline area, you can actually right click in the blank space and choose New, Solid, or, let me pull this down a little bit. If you don't have space, like blank space to do new, you can actually come up to Layer, New, Solid. Control Y is a shortcut key. So in here you can choose the color. So let's say, I'll leave it as orange, but you can just click in here and pick a color. Let's go with deep orange. There we go. And you can name it. So I can call this background. And I can be specific, background orange maybe. And the size I could set, the aspect ratio, pixels, everything else is fine. I'm just going to click OK. So now, and because I had the G selected, that kind of placed the layer above the G. So I'm just going to click and drag this down so I can change its layer position. And there we have it. Now it's behind all the letters, and I have an orange background with blue text, which is almost eye-racking. It's insane, but that's how you can actually add a background color. I can apply effects, but like I said, we're going to continue on a different tutorial on all that. I'm just showing you that's how you can add a background if you don't want black and you want a physical background that you can change. Join me for part 3, and we're going to create a whole new logo animation.